Hello, you are here on Delight in the Limelight live show. I'm Linda Ugolo, your host. I am here to help you find a way from the dread of speaking to loving it instead. And I bring on guests to help us in different aspects of speaking confidence. And if you're somebody who is nervous when you speak, if you feel like, oh, I should get on videos, but I'm not doing it, just want to alert you that my next cohort for the Delight in the Limelight Accelerator is starting in 3 weeks. And if you are interested in learning more about it, reach out to me at lindaugolo.com. Message me there and we can start a conversation. So today I have on my show an expert in storytelling. Her name is Susan Lovett. She's a story consultant and writer who helps entrepreneurs, small businesses, and content creators craft stronger stories from the first word. And she's a bit obsessed with stories. She started her writing career with Mickey Mouse before becoming the director of communications for a national nonprofit and launching her own studio. And she's worked with clients ranging from NASA to Nordstrom, National Geographic to PBS, the US Army to Women's Day, and many, many more. So she's here today to help us with making storytelling for business made easy. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, and you reached out to me and I took a look at what you've been doing and I thought, oh, wow, this is pretty amazing. I just feel like this is your life. Your life is about telling stories and helping people engage with their storytelling so it works for them. Can you say a
Yes.
little bit more? What did I leave out?
Oh, I have been obsessed with story as a young child, even. I have a degree in writing, and I spend days each month researching at the Library of Congress in the neuroscience of story. I still study storytelling and story writing because it changes, but it's been with us since the dawn of time, since the caveman times when we would sit around the fire and they would tell stories to prevent people from eating the wrong berries or fighting and hunting in the wrong grounds. We've always used story. It's how we capture our history and our memories. It's how we engage with each other. It's how we live. It's the most human form of expression there is.
I so glad you bring up, about relating to one another because I think we are getting the sense of those of us who are in business or we work in a company that we should do stories. We should tell stories, but we're not always sure like, well, how do I bring that into a presentation? What if I'm talking about like money and finances or we get so high level that we don't see how story fits in. What do you say to that?
Story always fits in. It's it's the basis for empathetic connection, for emotion, and people actually form the decision to buy in their amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, before they validate that experience or that feeling with the facts. So if you're just presenting facts, you're missing the boat. You're going to have a much lower return on your investment. You need to be able to connect people with the data. And you do that by going small. You tell small stories. You don't need grand Lord of the Rings type stories. You need to tell a story about one person. The smaller you go, the more universal your theme. It's
Okay, so I want to stop you right there. So I feel like one of the things that people might be thinking about, because people who are listening to this, some may be like entrepreneurs where they're selling a service or a product. Other people might be, part of a team where they're just sharing information, they're doing an update, they're revealing a new project. How is the way we tell a story going to be the same for everybody? Are there some commonalities, or do we take each of these things kind of separately?
The story may change forms, but it will never change in its essence. You might tell a very short story. You can tell a story in 6 words, an entire complete story. In fact, there is an annual competition called the 6-word story. And it's attributed to Hemingway. No one's completely sure whether that's true, but he wrote a story, baby for sale, baby shoes never worn. It doesn't take much to hook the imagination and make you start, your brain will start to fill in the details of that story. So when you're talking about a quick update or an email or something short, you don't need a long story. You need something that will attract the emotions, because we want to elicit the emotion to connect with our audience. And that's where the connection is made. It's through dopamine and oxytocin and endorphins, and we release those through story.
So can you give it a couple of examples, like in different environments?
Well, if you're in a speech environment, you're going to probably start off with a story, and that will set the tone and the theme for the speech that will follow. You may embed shorter related stories throughout the speech and then circle back at the end to reference the beginning story. So in that sense, it's a little bit more planned out. But if you're talking about an email, it could be something as simple as, the other day I was at a cafe and I looked out the window and there was a gentleman trying to shove 24 balloons into the back of a Subaru. And of course, the balloons didn't want to go into the Subaru. I watched for 10 minutes and all I kept thinking is, life is messy. And sometimes it won't go the way you want to. And what a great email that would be on talking about, if you have the right systems in place, then it won't matter if some of the balloons get loose.
Right,
You,
right,
you
right.
just,
I love that for an email, starting with a little anecdote of something that's from your life.
exactly.
That's great. And also I related to the keynote because I know I'm thinking of my own keynote on imposter syndrome. And I
Mhm.
start off with a story of being accosted in the bathroom after a show where somebody recognized me and they
Ah,
said, "Can I touch you?" And I'm thinking, "Can you touch me in the
that's an
bathroom?"
odd place to ask
Sure.
that question.
But yeah, I know, it's like I think I left out the, "Oh my gosh, can I touch you? You're in Labana, right?" So, I left that part out, so it wasn't quite as weird, but it was pretty unusual, and
Mhm.
yet I started with that story because in that moment, I experienced imposter syndrome. Here, somebody was, like, recognizing me. They thought, "Oh my god, you're in this amazing performing group. I love your group." And I'm thinking inside, "Oh, she doesn't know what a fraud I am. I don't consider myself a singer. I'm not good enough." So I use that as a connecting story, and I think that's
Yes,
what you're referring to, the connecting story that may be at the beginning of a speech or talk that you're giving.
right.
And
Any kind of
and
a
so
presentation or course would work too.
right, right. So let's move on to and that's a great e example for an email. What about, let's say, a presentation at a company, and let's say you're doing a I don't know, it could be a forecast or a reflection on the year, numbers, something with numbers, like, how do you bring story into something financial?
You relate what the money means to the people who use it. So if you're funding a certain program, you pick someone out from that program who benefited from that money and you tell
Mhm.
their story. You have to find the meaning within the numbers. And data always reflects something that's real, mostly, unless you're talking about a tech audience, which is why I don't do technical writing, because it's not conducive to story. But if you're talking about a company, and here's a perfect example. I did a project. It was a PR push for a major bank in America. I won't divulge the name because of confidentiality, but they gave me 5 boxes of VHS tapes. This is dating me. This was way back, and said, go through these and find some stories to tell for a 20-minute video that will promote our community outreach programs. And it took a lot, but went through and found the stories that reflected the money so that when they went to the board, they could get the funding to continue those programs because they could show real impact in the community level.
Mhm.
So it was finding one person in each program across the country to stand up and say, "This is what the program did for my life."
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's finding those moments. And I have a lot of clients who come to me, especially the government employees. They're famous for this. They'll come to me and they say, "There's no story here. We're about mission." Especially the Army. The Army loves to say that. "We're about mission, we're not about stories." It's like, no, there's stories in the soldiers who are implementing your mission. And that's where you find the funding, especially when people are searching for funding to go to Congress and try to get the funding back for a program. You have to connect with story because they don't understand the numbers
Mm.
in most
S
cases. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's so the story gives the meaning to the reason.
Yes, it shows why the money is being spent in that way.
Mhm.
It's not just about the numbers. It's not about if you're a small business person and you're doing an end of month review of this is how many new subscribers I have. It's not about whatever you did to get those subscribers. It's why did they join? What was their motivation? What transformation are they seeking? Why are they coming to you? What are you going to be able to perform to give to them to transform their lives?
Right.
That's what the story is. It's not, "Oh, you got 300 new subscribers." It's, "Why did you get them? Why did
Mhm.
they join?"
These are all so kind of like these are all people who are wanting to make speaking something that they enjoy doing in their lives. They're tired of,
Yes.
that carrying around their anxiety and nerves, and this is one of the biggest fears, in our society today or something like that. Like I
Yeah.
would say something like
It's
that. Okay.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And speaking of which, Susan, so a lot of times I know I personally am moved not just like why people joined, but what did people get out of something? Like fan mail, like the biggest results that people get. How do you recommend sharing about people's results, whether it's from that product or that service or program?
number 1, you have to get their permission to share their story. That is the number 1 rule of storytelling. You can tell your stories as much as you want, although there are some rules about that I put in place. Um, but if you're telling someone else's story, you need their permission. So once you get that, then you can go in and share their experience and walk people through what they felt. It's a little bit more difficult because you're telling a third person story at that point. So you need to employ more storytelling techniques than when you're just sharing a memory of your own.
And so what would some of those story techniques be?
You need to know what the through line is of your story. What's the purpose? What's the driving force underneath that story? And that's true for any story that you're going to tell. Through line is absolutely essential. You need to have structure, which is also essential. And there's a lot of different writing structures. Um, and then you need to have a status quo, where they were when they started, what shifted, why did they join, why did they get on this path to change, what was the conflict, what was holding them back, what did they have to overcome. And then you have the climax, which is the big reveal, the big transformation, the aha moment, the moment everything shifted. It could just be one thing that they thought, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that before." I remember going to see a lecture. It was an award ceremony, and they were giving it, the Smithsonian was giving an award to Yo-Yo Ma, and nobody expected him to play. It was an award ceremony, but he pulled his cello out and he said, "It took me 15 years to figure out that if I moved my hand on my bow half an inch, it would make this difference." And he played a before and an after, and it was incredible, the difference in sound from a half an inch difference in his hand. Those are the moments you want to capture from your people, is what were those tiny things that made an enormous impact on the back end.
Oh, I just got chills listening to that story because it kind of I mean, that circles back to, let's say, Well, I guess it relates both to our own stories and stories we tell about, clients or customers,
Mhm.
that it can be these small things that are most memorable. I don't think
Yes.
I'll ever forget that story that you just told.
It was an impactful moment, and it was completely unexpected. No one expected him to tell a story. No one expected him to play, but it was a profound moment, and for me, it went into my story bank. I collect stories every day. I stick them in my story bank, and it was one of those times where I thought, "That's going in. That's the moment I'm capturing for today." So
Okay, I have 2 questions. One's a quick question about
mhm.
what you said about getting people's permission. Can you use anonymity? Or
You
even with anonymity, you need to.
It depends on the client. With some of my clients, with the big corporations and government agencies and things, I've signed NDAs, so even anonymously, I cannot refer to those stories. But barring that, which is a very limited, it'll affect a limited number of people. Barring that, you can keep it general and keep the name out.
Mhm,
But it's better to get the person's permission to share their story, because then
mhm,
you can share more personal details. Whenever you make it more generalized, you also aren't going to get the same connection from your audience if it's
mhm.
anonymous,
Yeah,
because you could have just made it up. And people
yeah,
are very big on authenticity these days.
yeah,
They are tired of being told things that aren't true,
yeah.
and they're very skeptical. So the minute you put a name with the story, it helps.
Mhm,
I tend not to put a lot of names to my stories from past clients, because I don't have their written permission to do so, but I'll
mhm.
tell their stories in a general way.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking, like, when I wrote my book, I said at the beginning that I've changed people's names for
Mhm.
anonymity, to protect them, because a lot of people who come to me for speaking confidence, especially if they are somewhere in their career where they're at the top of their game, they may be in the C-suite, they don't want other people to know that they suffer from
No.
speaking anxiety, they just wanna get over it and then, like,
Right.
slide it into the work that they do. So,
Yes.
I have, changed names, or I've even changed professions, so as
You
not to
can
be
do that,
recognizable.
yes.
But I
I've
do also understand what you're saying, because the specificity is powerful.
It is, and if you're in a position where you can share those specific details, you have their permission to do so, then I would recommend doing that.
Mhm,
But it can be powerful to tell a story without that. You just have to be careful how you tell it. I mean, I've written a lot of speeches for a lot of people who do not want anyone to know that I'm writing their speeches. Um, I I would have to change a lot to not be recognized
mhm.
for that person. So at that point, you have to question, how valuable is the story if none of it is real, if it's all been altered? At what point does that
Although,
become helpful?
well, but it illustrates a point. I mean, we certainly enjoy parable and fables.
Yes. And if you can relate it, if you can have concrete truths embedded within it from your side, from what you were able to help them, then it becomes more of a real story. Becomes your story of their experience, not their
Mm,
story. And if you keep
mhm.
it within your realm, then it would work just fine.
And what does that mean, to keep it inside my realm or someone's realm?
Point of view. We're talking about point of view for the story. You've got first person point of view, which is I. I did this. You've got second point of view, which is you. It's used in marketing all the time. You should do this. You should do that. Maybe not the should, but the you. And third person is when you're talking about someone else, and that's when you're bringing up someone's story. You would do it in third person. As long as your story remains in first person, so that it is your experience and from your perspective, you're talking about things that you know about or that they've said directly to you, then you're fine, because that stays within your realm. You're not, what we call in fiction world, you're not head hopping. You're not hopping from your perspective to their perspective and back to yours. it's confusing and it's difficult. If you've ever read a book where you don't know which character is speaking, that's head hopping, because
Got it.
they're jumping points of view,
Mhm.
and that can be problematic. And when we're talking about business stories, there's an ethical line there too,
Mhm. Mhm.
because you don't want to put words in your client's mouth.
Yeah.
Is
So what
basically what it comes down to.
uh uh you mentioned story bank and that you have a story
Yes.
bank. Like, how do you keep that organized and so that it's something that is useful to go back into? Like, how do you do that?
I have a Notion database that I keep, that I've transferred all my stories to. It's sortable, it's filterable. I put in keywords, I put in themes, I put in and through lines if applicable. Um, and I actually have that on my website for sale, the product. But I go through and I teach how to collect the stories. I offer a lot of prompts, different perspectives on stories, but it's become a habit. It's just something that I collect along the way. And I do label them business, client, personal, private. Private stories will never be shared. And there are certain stories that should never be shared, except with trusted friends and therapists and people like that. Certainly don't share anything that is a current wound that hasn't scabbed over, that hasn't healed yet. That's not something that you should put out there. Um, People have different lines of what they consider private. A lot of people put everything out there. I personally don't put a lot out there. I'll put my stories. I will not put my family stories. Those are theirs, and they're not mine to tell. But other people have different feelings about it. So you just do what feels right to you. But I would say take some time to consider what should remain private.
Mhm. So you said you have this for sale, this whole, how do you have a
This whole
story bank?
story bank. Yes, it's the
Okay.
story bank
And
product.
okay, and so people can go to your website, which is
Figmentsandfables.com.
mhm, okay,
So,
figmentsandfables.com. We'll put that in the show
yes.
notes for sure. And
Yeah.
I know I'm gonna get that because it's something that I have heard about, and probably I've started a document or 2 for that kind of thing, but then
Mhm.
haven't made it the habit. And I
Well,
think that's what's important. And also I've never used Notion. So is that something
Notion
that
is
you
Notion's pretty easy. I have a lot of my life in Notion. It's how I keep everything organized. You don't necessarily need Notion to do this. You can do it in any document, but I would recommend, if you're going to start a story bank, to have it be filterable, so that if you are sitting there and wanting to write a speech or an email or a marketing piece or whatever, and you have a certain topic, you can go to your story bank, type in that topic, and all the stories with that keyword will pop up, and you go, oh, that's the right one for me to use today. It prevents that blank page paralysis when you're sitting there looking at a blank page and not knowing what stories. I don't have any stories. What am I going to say? Well, you go to your story bank, you type in what the topic is, and you're like, oh, well, here's 6 stories that I have right at hand, and I already know what I can do with them, and you can begin writing. So that's the biggest help with the story
yes,
bank.
that's great. So I'm also wondering, like, how do you know what to put in? So I'm thinking of the story you told about the balloons going into
Mhm.
the trunk. These are the things that we should be, like, paying attention to in our lives? Like, what do we see that catches our attention and that
Well,
goes into the story bank or
there's a book called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix, and he talks about homework for life, and it's a story collection system, which is what story banks are all based on. And he talks about every day find one moment that is worthy of being put into your homework for life. And the thing is, you don't need to capture the whole story. For me, when I saw the man with the balloons, it was 2 dozen balloons in Subaru. That's all I needed to put to for me to remember. Now I have a kind of freakishly strong memory, but I remember back to when I was 2. But um But I have stories in there that have 2 words. That's all I need to remember exactly what happened,
So
all the details.
you also talked about, like, filtering it and putting tags and or themes or through lines, like, how would you let's say with that particular story, what would you have put there so
Life
that
is
you could
messy, things don't go as planned. That's what was popping in my head as I was watching. It's like, "Oh,
Mhm,
he had this plan of getting those in there and it's not going well." So, and then you think about context. It's like, how could I use this story? Because it was funny and I liked
mhm,
it and I enjoyed watching him. It was a nice little break from work. So, as I was putting it in, I put 2 or 3 tags. Put life is messy. I put trying to shove everything into a too small space. That's probably it for that story. It wasn't a big
mhm,
story,
mhm.
but some stories, there are lots of themes. That, like the time the US Post Office declared me dead. There's a lot of stories. That's a long story, and there are a lot of lessons in the trauma that that caused. They told my bank, my credit cards, my college, everything that I was deceased when I asked them to put my mail on hold for 2 weeks while I went on a business trip. Caused a lot of problems.
Oh
All I need to
my.
do is USPS dead. That's the code in my story bank, and I just put a few little keywords, tag lines of things that types of stories that they would fall into. And that's
Mhm.
the thing is you want to come up with types of stories you're going to be telling. If you are selling a certain amount of a certain type of product, then certain themes are going to be aligned to that product and to your business in general. And it's all about alignment and through lines. You should have through lines for your story, for the project the story is in, and for your business itself, and everything should align to those as well as to your values and to your mission. So it's an interconnected web, and from that come the tags that you'll use in your story bank and anywhere else.
Right, right. So how do you keep track of the tags you have? So you might have all these stories, you might have made up some tags, but how do you know what tags you have even?
In Notion, you can do a multi-select and you just create a list and you can scroll it.
Oh, okay. That
So it's
makes it
easy. You
much
don't have
easier.
to remember.
There we
It's
go,
right there.
storytelling. That's storytelling made easy. So,
Yeah.
let's circle back to this idea of storytelling made easy.
Mhm.
The first thing is to have some stories.
Yes.
So, to recognize that we have stories. So, probably number one thing would be to create a story bank and start maybe every day or just have make it a habit to look at things that could potentially be stories for us.
Right. It's
Mhm,
it's a bit of a mind shift too. You have to get into the habit of collecting stories, of seeing stories. A
mhm.
lot of people say, "I'm not creative. I'm not a storyteller. I don't have stories," which is insane because you have memories and memories are stories. You have history. History is story. So everything in your life has been a story. We're anthologies. We've got chapters that are romance and chapters that are tragedies and drama and action and horror and suspense. We've got them all. And you just need to be able to recognize your memories as story and start learning the fundamentals of how to craft those into stories. And that comes down to just story fundamentals of how do you put a story together.
Okay, let's go there.
Okay. There are, when I work with clients, I use my FABLE method. The first thing I do is F, find the through line. Now, I haven't really described what a through line is, but it is the
Yes,
drive.
I that's been one of my held questions. You've mentioned it 3 times already, so now's the moment.
Through lines are the driving force that push your story from the beginning all the way through to the end. So everything connects to it. It is not your plot. Your plot is what happens. Your story is why what happens matters. Your
Mm.
through line is the driving force that gets you from point A to point Z. It is things like the movie Taken. His daughter was kidnapped. Everything that happens in that story is his drive to get his daughter back and exact revenge. Same thing in John Wick. They killed his dog. He's going to get revenge. Everything that he does relates to that initial inciting incident, is what we call it. That moment in the beginning where everything changed.
How
And
is
you're
that different
driving.
from a plot?
A plot is the things that are happening. So he goes to this place and he finds a clue, and then he goes to the next place. It's a map. It's a roadmap. It tells you how you're going to proceed through. It's a collection of scenes. It is not the driving force. The scenes need to click into it. Think of it like an animal, and the animal has a spine. Everything that hangs off of the spine is a scene. Everything that puts you forward is part of the plot, but you should keep the spine intact. So you start at the beginning and you end at the tip of the tail. That is what a through line is. It was actually created by Konstantin Stanislavski, who was a famous drama coach from Russia. He taught here in the States, and he was infamously came up with the method acting, which has been altered and changed in very different ways, not from what he originally come up with. But his point was every action, everything that happens in a story needs to be motivated. So you wouldn't want someone to get up from a couch and go answer the door if a doorbell hasn't rung, no one's knocked, or they didn't see the Amazon delivery person coming up the driveway. There has to be a reason for things to happen. The through line is that reason. It's the one thing that is pushing the character from the beginning to the end. It's delivering the ring to Mordor. It's
So would you say
every
that
story has it.
the through line hops, skips, and jumps across the plot?
No, it's an actual line. It holds everything together. It's the main quest. It's things like, let me put it in an analogy. It's like a video game. Your main quest in all of the Zelda video games, you have the main story quest. Link has to stop Ganon, usually stop the evil. And so everything he does, everything you do in the game is getting you to win at the end, save Hyrule. Then you have side quests, things that are happening on the side where you can improve your skills or help people and get rewards. Mostly it's just helping people and you get rewards like money or food or whatever it is. Those things help you in your quest, but they're not part of the main quest. The through line is your main quest. It's the reason you're out there in the first place. And it's what you're trying to finish at the end. It's the whole why, which is different than theme. Theme is like good versus evil. That's too universal. Your through line is the thing that helps you keep track. When you're making your plot, you go back to that touchstone and you say, does this fit in? It's your alignment. In business terms, that is your alignment. It's what keeps you on track so that everything you do matters, that it's going to the right place. So you don't end up with things that are all over the place that don't align to what you actually wanted to accomplish in the first place.
Okay.
And that's a through line.
Okay, so now that I've taken you off the through line of how we structure a story. So we have
you start with your through line. You figure out what you're trying to do, what's your intent, and then you align everything in your plot to that through line so that it supports it, so that it gets you to where you need to be, and then you begin the story crafting, where you have the hook, where you grab people, and then you have the inciting incident that changes everything, that takes them from what they were to where they're going to be. And then you go through and you make sure that each scene after, or each bit of your story after, has tension, because if you don't have tension, people aren't going to stay attentive to it. They're going to wander. So you need conflict. And that usually, in a business sense, that's usually what obstacles do you need to overcome? What's holding you back? What are the things that are difficult? It could be tech issues. It could be the fear of public speaking, that nervousness of getting up in front of people and expressing your ideas. It could be any number of things depending on what this business is. But those are the points of conflict that you want to talk about. And then you have the resolution at the end. Something big happens that changes everything, that gives them that new transformation, that new insight. And then you have the closing, which is when you wrap it all up nice in a bow and you give people a sense of closure. Because otherwise, if you just end the story, they're going to be dissatisfied. There's something in our brain called the anticipatory response, and we fill in things. So that's why when you're watching a TV show, you're like, oh, I know what's going to happen next. And you're thrilled when that's not what happens. So you want to do a little bit of that, switch it up a little bit, but at the end, you want to make sure that you do give some sense of closure. That's the reward for listening to the story.
Okay,
And
so
then,
there's more.
And then in a business sense, because stories are never told in isolation in business, then comes the critical element of transition from the story to the information.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably the biggest issue I see with most businesses telling stories. They either have an awkward or a missing transition.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel jarred. Like I was in this great story and then all of a sudden I'm being sold to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not great. You're going to turn off a lot of people.
So you spoke about this story structure, but you also mentioned there are lots of different story structures.
Yes, there are hundreds.
So there are hundreds. So
yes,
that feels complicated.
It is, but you have to understand that even though there's hundreds, they're basically following the same principles. They're just using them differently. Each famous writing person will want to come up with their own method. And so they'll slap their name on things. And it's really just a variation of, there are many variations of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which is kind of odd because the hero's journey, which everyone knows about, the main quest, the big story quest, was written as an anthropological analysis of folk tales. It was never meant to be a prescriptive writing structure. People tried to use it that way, started to realize that it was very limiting because it was so focused on folk tales and those elements that they started making variations. There are many variations. You can pick which one suits you. Then there are other types that are simplified or overly complicated. Everyone has a story. I am putting together an ebook right now on story structures, the pros and cons of each, for 99 of them. Which is a lot. But you have to have cultural sensitivity too, because like in Japan, they use Kishotenketsu. That's their story structure, not exclusively, but that's one of theirs. And it encompasses their cultural bias about the ending needing to show a joining with society, finding your place within community, finding your place within family. It's not the individual achieves, it's finding your way to belong, because that's their cultural bias for stories. And you see it throughout some anime. Some of the anime out there now has a Western structure, so they don't have that. It just depends on the story. But there are so many different types of storytelling. There are structures from Africa and India and South America and Asia. So being aware of those just gives you more options. I tend to teach the story spine, which is simple. Now, I use the Ken Adams version, not the Pixar simplified version. It's the same structure, but Pixar simplified it, and it works great for animated films. and for
So can you
some stories.
can you
So,
tell us a quick, easy story for any kind of business that we can then hear, you know, the different parts of the story that you're talking about? Something that would just take a minute.
oh, well, each business will be slightly different.
So just let's
There
say for
could
your
be
business. Do it
for
for
my
your business.
business. All
Yeah.
right, let me tell you how I started my writing studio. I was considering leaving my position as director of communications when I was approached by a friend, a colleague who I'd known for 3, 4 years, offered me a job. And I said, okay. At that point, I'd already been considering going on my own, but it was a good publishing house. And he was offering me an editor's position. So I went over and I interviewed. And he showed me my office. I said, "This is your office. These are your people. These are who you'll be working for. This is where you'll eat lunch. This is everything." And then as I was leaving, he said, "Oh, by the way, you need to fill out this form, this test that we require of everyone." And it turned out to be the Myers-Briggs type indicator test. And I thought, no big deal. I've taken that in college. I know what my type is. Not a problem. I completed the test. 2 days later, I got a call and was told I'd failed the personality test. I was too introverted to be considered a team leader, and they refused to hire me. They wouldn't hire anyone at that point who was too introverted on the scale. Now, the scale goes from 0 to 50. I was 49 out of 50, quite introverted. But he'd worked with me successfully for 3 years. And ironically, that's when I decided I would just launch my own company and ended up interacting with far more people than I ever would have at that position. So
Mhm.
that's how my
So
company began.
that's the through the story and the surprise because it was a
The
surprise.
surprise.
Yes.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a,
So,
we thought we knew what was gonna happen, and
right.
it turned out to be something different. And so if you were going to use this story, let's say, to put into something else, it could be any number of directions that you go in, right? It could
Well, if I
be
was talking to an audience of introverts, I would lean into the introvert problem.
mhm,
The fact that I'd failed because I was an introvert and what that meant to me. If I was
mhm.
talking about the decision to start a business, that maybe failing a test isn't the best way to start a business, but, um, it actually I had written several books at that point on my own moonlighting, so it was fine, but
So
there are many different
it could be for, let's say, people who are in transition, a story
Yes.
about being in transition,
And being
or
flexible to look at different opportunities to use that as not an ending or as a disappointment, but as proof that, yes, my choice to open in my own business has just been validated.
that's right. So one door
So
closes, another door opens.
right. So it depends on how you shift that perspective on
Mhm.
how you tell your story, and that's framing. It's how you're gonna frame your story.
Okay, and I
And
just had another one that came to my mind that I just feel like I have to share, which
Mhm.
is, for instance, you didn't, but you might have said decided to fight back. Like, even though it was a no, you might have chosen, but you didn't, to say to
Right.
fight for yourself, and that even that could be, depending on who you're speaking to or the point you wanna make, a lost opportunity, but that
Right.
people could know that it's not the end. It's not just a
Right.
no does not mean no necessarily.
I actually laughed when he told me because he'd pursued me.
I know it's
And
kind of
then to
odd.
go through the whole thing and reject me at the end for being too introverted, I thought it was funny. Um, I was a little bit appalled at the same time, but I tried to lean into the funny and just took it as validation that my initial idea was to start my own company.
Right, and that's
So,
the truth of it. I'm just thinking as an
right.
exercise, the different directions that
Yes,
someone can go in a story. I mean,
absolutely.
I even love that because it's almost like, let's not put too much, uh, weight on what other people do and what it means about us.
Right. Absolutely.
So there we came up with 4 different interpretations or segues into what you call the transition. Is that what you said?
Yes, the
Yes,
transition.
the
And then
transition.
you can use that to go into whatever is gonna come next. It could be content, it could be copy, it could be sales, it could be anything that comes after, depending on the
Right,
form you're taking, whether it's
right,
a blog or a sales page or a speech, an ebook. It just depends on what's gonna come after, how the transition needs to be structured. But
right,
you
right.
should have a transition. And the thing is, you need your through line for the story, but you need the through line for whatever the project is. So you're transitioning from the story through line to the main project through line. So that also is present in that transition.
Yes, yes. So
So
is there any what have we not covered? Did we cover the mistakes that people make? What do you think are the biggest storytelling mistakes that people make?
not having a through line, so not knowing what you're trying to accomplish by telling the story. Um, not being discerning about which stories you're going to tell. Not having a transition is not good. um, thinking that you can't tell a story because you're not a storyteller, so you don't even try, or you just throw something on the page that doesn't match at all with your business, the product, or what comes after. It's just there, and you're not sure why. That I get a lot of emails from a lot of businesses, and that happens a lot. I do it to see what's out there, what people are doing, and it's funny, some of the stories that come across. I'm like, "Why did you share that? There was no reason for you to share that particular story with me." Um,
Which gives you a lot of
so
stories to tell about how not to share a story and why to hire you.
right, but I would never use their things as examples because that would just be rude. But there are so many mistakes. The biggest one is not letting your voice come through. I just wrote a blog last week on the fastest ways to kill your voice. And one of them is using other people's templates, the paint by numbers type emails and things. You'll sound like everyone else, or you'll sound like the original person, but you won't sound like you. You using the AI integrated grammar programs like Grammarly, Hemingway, a pro writing aid. They kill voice. They kill any kind of sense of style. Um, using AI will do it as well. But there are certain things that you need to let shine through, and you as a person is one of them. People connect to people, not to things, not to just ideas or information. And if you're filtering everything you do through someone else's work, it's not going to land. You're not going to connect. Um, and
I
that's a serious problem.
I love that, and I love that we're kind of like closing on that to let that the most important thing is to let yourself be you,
Yes.
unfiltered,
Mhm.
un-AI'd.
Yes. And once you learn the blocks of how to put the stories together, which is what I help the clients do, it's not that difficult to tell your own stories or to write your own things. And it doesn't have to be grammatically correct. Yes, you don't want egregious grammar mistakes like subject verb disagreement and head hopping, the different points of view. You want to keep your tenses straight. But those are basics. Fragments, I don't care. Write them. They help with
Yeah.
pacing.
Mm,
End with a
mm,
preposition. It's better than having an awkward sentence construction.
mm,
So what I always recommend is read what you've written out loud. And if you stumble over it or you have difficulty speaking it out loud, rewrite it.
mm.
Make it sound like you. Make it easy to read aloud. And if you do that and you're consistent in what you do, like if you don't know punctuation really well, but you're consistent in how you use it, that's fine. Consistency matters more than accuracy. But make sure it sounds good. And at the end of the last thing that I do with clients is I apply my rhythm, cadence, and flow method, which is all about voice, pacing, getting that that sense of flow and story logic. Everything you put in needs to be logically aligned. It needs to make sense so that everything just flows. And that's really what you're trying to achieve. You don't need to be a master writer to do that. You just need to know how to talk.
Yeah, yeah. Although I
So,
think, once you know these things, it feels natural, but when you don't know these things, you don't know what logical sounds like. You don't
right.
know,
And
right?
that's why you
So
need to learn the foundations. And once you
yes.
get those building blocks, then you can apply them to anything you do,
Mhm.
not
So
just a single application.
right. So can you, just describe really briefly what it looks like when someone works with you?
Well, there are a number of ways they can work with me. I have Fable cohorts, which are small mastermind courses, one on story foundations, one on the neuroscience of story, one on script writing, speech writing. It's writing for the ear, basically. And in those, I have two different versions where you can just get the coursework on a light version, but for each session, I allow 15 people one-on-one access to me, and I give hot seat feedback. I go through their things. I teach them what it really looks like on the page, and I do on-site coaching, and they get 8 weeks of that. So that's one version to do it. Or you can hire me as a one-on-one coach, in which case I will send you an intent form, an intake form, where I find the context of what we're going to do, because context is important in stories too. And then I work them through my Fable method, which is you find your through line, align your messages, begin the story, link with transitions, and end strong. And that's the method. And then I apply the rhythm, cadence, and flow on top, and we'll go through voicing and style and tone and brand messaging and making sure that everything is cohesive. And that's how I work with clients. I work through that framework, and it may expand or contract depending on how much time they're spending with me and what project they're doing and where they are. I mean, it's if they come to me and they say, I want to do a speech about X, and that's all they have, it's going to be a very different process than if they come to me and say, here's a series of emails, and I'm not sure that they're really working. Can we work through them and refine them? That's a different process, but it follows the same basic tenets of storytelling.
That's great. That's great. So where can people find you?
At my website, www.figmentsandfables.com. I also am on Pinterest, Figments and Fables. I just started with that, so it's pretty small. But I have a student-only Facebook group that is open to anyone who has one of my products, including free products. So you can come in and join there, and I will go live and do special tips and things in that space for my clients. So
That's
those are the big ways to find me. I'm
Thank
still
you.
working as a writer, producer, director for my major corporate clients and documentary films. So I don't have as big of a footprint in social media because I just don't have the time.
Yes,
But
yes, we have limited capacity, but it sounds like you are doing a tremendous amount with all the things that you are involved with. So thank you so much, Susan, for coming on and sharing your understanding and experience with storytelling and giving us all these ideas of the story bank and the difference between through lines and plot. And these are all things that have been on my mind. So I personally feel edified and
that's
very
good.
inspired to think about storytelling in some new ways. So
Great.
for those of you who are listening to this on the replay, I hope you also have received a lot of benefit from this. And I want you to feel all the time that you are on this journey to more confidence in your self-expression and in your own speaking. And once again, if you are listening to this, well, anytime you're listening to this, really, I'll be having an upcoming cohort of the Delight in the Limelight Accelerator so that you can get over your fear of speaking and learn to turn that dread into delight in all your Limelight moments. So until then, wishing you enjoyment in all the speaking that you do.